You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast produced by Veteran Strategies and featuring conversations with fascinating and impactful men and women who have shaped our world, our communities, and our history. My name is Robert Vane, Principal of Veteran Strategies, and your host for our discussion. You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, a local veteran public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmond Construction, Leaders and Legends, LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and McAllister Machinery, your friendly neighborhood Caterpillar dealer. You may find all your sales and rental equipment needs at McAllister.com. We are pleased to announce our podcast is now a member of the All Indiana Podcast Network in partnership with Wish TV. You may find Leaders and Legends at allindianapodcastnetwork.com. Thinking of starting a podcast or need to host a public meeting? Let Leaders and Legends LLC be your partner as you look for new ways to communicate your message. Please contact Chris Spangle and me at leadersandlegends.net. Thank you for joining us on the Leaders and Legends podcast. Our guest today is Fred Glass, a man who has done so much for so many, not only in Bloomington when he was athletic director for Indiana University and a vice president, but also his civic engagement is second to none. We're very happy to have you on, Fred. Thank you.
Robert, thanks for having me on. It's great to be here. The only thing that'd be better is if we were doing a remote from the Ace. So maybe like if we reprise this, we could sneak that in.
Well, I'm happy to do that because now they're open again. And one of your good friends, Kathy Davis, came on the podcast and we recorded at the Ace.
Awesome. That's great. Good.
It's funny, as I read the promo, people smile really big when I mention McAllister Machinery because they loved PE. And you knew PE very well, obviously, PE McAllister. And they smile really big when I mention the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn. You've done so much in your career. Obviously, being a lawyer has been a huge asset to your career, I would assume, given the success you've had. We're going to jump right into this. And the reason we're jumping right into this is because my son is a sophomore. He just finished his sophomore year at Purdue. Sorry, Fred.
Sorry.
And he wants to be an attorney. And so what do you say to young attorneys, to people who want the law as a profession?
So I say that if your vision is to start at the bottom rung of a gigantic law firm and kind of work your way up and be there forever, then I wonder if that's what you really want to do with your life. And that's like somebody who's been at two different gigantic law firms. It's been great for me, but it wasn't a career defining or consuming activity. But I'm always very encouraging if people want to go to law school because it might sound trite, but I really think it, one, teaches you a special way to think. Lawyers are very adept at cutting through the chaff to get to the wheat, separating the irrelevant from the relevant. And I took that super for granted when I was working with lawyers all the time in the governor's office or at Baker and Daniels. But one of the things at IU I really noticed was it's a different deal when you're working with a lot of people that aren't lawyers. That may sound smug. I don't mean for it to be, but I think lawyers have a special training, a special way of thinking. I think it's really valuable. And then I think it's a distinguishing characteristic. It's a distinguishing feature if you're going to go into politics or sports or entertainment or whatever. So, I would be encouraging for your son to go there. I think my dad was a law school dropout. He always described it as a license, like a plumber or an electrician, which I actually embraced, because it's something you own. Nobody can take it away from you. And I think part of the reason I've been willing to take risks in my career is I always knew I could fall back on my license. I could put it up on Shadeland Avenue and chase ambulances and scratch out a living, and it was sort of freeing. So,
well, unfortunately, there are a lot of ambulances on Shadeland, on the east side, on Shadeland Avenue. Do you get the sense it's a validator? Like, don't try to put me in the corner. I'm an attorney, kind of thing.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's a well-earned credential, that I think helps you in a lot of different areas and opens some doors that may not otherwise have been open, distinguishes you from people that fairly or not, it gives you a little bit of a leg up. So I would be encouraging to him. I've got 3 sons. One's a lawyer now. One just finished his first year at McKinney, and one is enrolling in the fall at Maurer. So I guess I voted with my feet on this in terms of giving advice.
My good friend, someone the brilliant Jennifer Wagner, got a law degree, went to law school, and I'm like, why are you going to law school? She goes, because so lawyers can't tell me I'm not a lawyer.
That's a pretty good reason, actually. Yeah.
Nobody's better at messaging than Jennifer Wagner.
Yeah.
Succinct and to the point. Did you have sort of a mentor, a legal mentor? I know that you worked for Judge S.U. Dillon, but were there others as well?
Yeah, I didn't growing up. So there were a lot of people in my law school class that had uncles or moms or grandfathers that were lawyers. And I felt a little bit behind the curve on that. But I was very fortunate to have, starting with Judge Dillon, Bryce Bennett at Riley Bennett Egloff was a mentor, lots of mentors at Baker and Daniels. Charlie Richardson was a big mentor for me. So, yeah, I've been the beneficiary of that for sure.
Do you have a favorite legal movie?
Probably The Paper Chase. Yeah, I would say the original Paper Chase.
Well, John Houseman, the movie was early to mid 70s.
Yeah, exactly. Timothy Bottoms. It's really corny when you look back on it, but I thought it was so cool at the time, and encourage my boys to watch it. I think they've gotten a kick out of it. It captures law school in a certain way that's fairly accurate.
You are now at Taft. You had mentioned you had spent several years, 15 years at Baker and Daniels. There are some rock stars at Taft, some of whom are mutual friends of ours, whether that's Lacey Johnson or Kyle Hupfer or the list, Mark Shoeblack, John Hammond, the list goes on and on, who are attorneys. How fun and how much does it mean to you to be at a firm where there's that much, not just star power, because that's not a wrong term to use here in this city and state, but that much brain power and that much respect?
Well, it's one of the reasons I originally came here, and that was even before those guys arrived on the scene. The quality of lawyers here were already great, and when you add talent like that, it's very reassuring. When guys like John Hammond and the other folks you mentioned choose to come here, that's really reaffirming in terms of a decision. I actually came to Taft because of my longtime friend, Mickey Terrell, who's probably a guy that you may not know and your listeners may not know. He's a very prominent employment lawyer in the city and state. He and I were law school classmates, roommates my first year at school. And we had talked way early in our career, would it be cool if our final chapter was sort of together? So I came here in great part because of Mickey. But also, Taft's a little bit the new kid on the block compared to, Faegre and Ice and Barnes and some others. So it's a real strong national firm, but a little bit newer in this market. I thought it'd be fun to be with the up and coming guys.
How much fun do you get? How much joy do you get when you practice law as opposed to lobbying or being law firm, as you mentioned earlier, can do so many things. And there's some people like our previous guest, Jim Voiles, just loves the courtroom and obviously has done very, very well in the courtroom. There's lots of different paths to take. Which path did you choose? And how has that made your career better?
So I don't want to go down a bunch of rabbit trails, but it's interesting you asked that question because I was just talking about it I had lunch with Bart Peterson yesterday. And I was talking about his experience being on your show, and I was going to be on your show, and he loved it. But when I left the governor's office and went to Baker and Daniels, I sort of had to make a decision on what I wanted to do. And I was very seduced into thinking, I need to get an expertise, man, because I don't have, I'm coming out of the governor's office. I'd done a lot of different things. I was a lawyer, but I'd been a long time since I'd litigated. And so I thought, I really need to get some sort of technical skill that I can sell internally and externally and be a real lawyer. But I didn't really want to be a real lawyer. I wanted to be a kind of a trusted advisor, an adjunct member of the executive team of different organizations, a civic leader, and do a broader, less defined role. And Bart and I were going to a Green Bay Packer game. We went to Green Bay every year because we were pre-Colt Packer fans. And I was telling him this. I'm like, man, I think I'm going to try to figure out how to be a technical lawyer. And he goes, don't do that, man. That's like a commodity. With all due respect to the awesome technical lawyers out there, he goes, follow your heart, do the civic stuff, do the non-billable stuff, build a practice, be an adjunct member of the team, even if it feels kind of uncomfortable that it's not a super technical expertise area. And that's what I did. I tried to build a practice where I was really, for lack of a better term, a trusted advisor to business leaders, and was fortunately able to build, a pretty robust practice at Baker & Daniels before I left there to go to IU. And that's what I'm looking to replicate now, Robert, is really a practice that's a general business practice where hopefully I'm like in some ways as much a business consultant as I am a lawyer.
I guess we should mention that Bart Peterson is an attorney.
Right.
I believe with the University of Michigan. Is that correct for his law?
Exactly right. And he was at Ice Miller for several years, very successful there. Awesome firm. Did have an area of expertise, but so he knew what he was talking about and sort of convinced me to walk the plank a little and try something different.
You mentioned before we started the recording that you're a member of the Brebeuf Mafia, which is probably a little different than the East Side Mafia that I'm a member of, but that's a whole nother podcast. How did Brebeuf, the Jesuit education, shape your intellect, and when did you get turned on by politics?
Well, I will tell you, I have a passing knowledge of the East Side Mafia. I married a girl from Arlington High School, and some of my best friends, as they say, are East Siders. So
Denny Sutherland being one of them, I'm guessing.
Yeah, exactly right. He's a Golden Knight as well, as is Lacey Johnson and others. But
Rick Fuson.
Rick, yeah, exactly.
Benita Moore, as I recall.
Exactly. It was kind of the place to be. But yeah, my dad went to Cathedral, but he went to Marquette University on the GI Bill, a Jesuit school, and he became very much a believer in the Jesuits. And so he sent me to this new school, Brebeuf Jesuit, and wanted me to go there. And not so much the time, but over the years, that Ignatian philosophy and Jesuit approach, the Jesuit way of proceeding, as they say, it's been very, very impactful to me. I was the first alumnus to chair the board of trustees at Brebeuf, which was a real honor. And not so much, Robert, in the theological sense. It's not a religious thing for me. Really, it's their incredible approach to leadership and just a way of living. So it's been very impactful for me. I use a lot of things I learned from the Jesuits at IU and in other roles. And it's a tight knit group. I mean, I know you worked for Murray Clark when he was state chair, good friend from Brebeuf, and the list kind of goes on and on about folks from Brebeuf, and we tend to stick together and value our common experiences there.
Was it at Brebeuf that you became interested in politics? And how did you, and I asked Mayor Peterson this question, I can't remember his answer, but I remember asking him the question of what landed you on the Democrat side of the aisle?
Yeah, I think my dad liked to say that I was a prenatal Democrat. And like a lot of us, probably the single biggest thing that forges our political affiliation is our parents. Bart may be the exception to that.
I was just
parents are rock-ribbed Republicans. But when I was 5 years old, my mom ran for precinct committee woman against the slate. It was the Young Turks at the time, and she went to try to get Andy Jacobs elected, and she took me around to the houses, mostly, and you probably, I don't know if you've done this before. I've done this with my own kids. When you're trying to get signatures, you take your little kids along because they tend to get the doors opened a little better. I think my mom was doing that with me. So I've literally been, walking the precinct since I was 5 and stuffing envelopes and getting involved in campaigns. And I just loved it, man. I wrote LBJ letters when I was a kid. My mom took me down to the Circle to see LBJ, took me to the airport to see JFK. I was a kid on the playground at St. Thomas Aquinas School, where I went at 46 in Illinois in 1968. I was 9 years old, and there was all this hubbub that occurred. And to make a long story short, Bobby Kennedy was here for that primary, and he saw these Catholic kids playing on the playground, and he stopped the motorcade and weighed in. I got to shake Bobby Kennedy's hand, a few weeks before he was assassinated. So it's just been in my blood, really, really from my parents, and they were, Democrats and union members and all that stuff.
And you grew up in a pretty heady time. Vietnam, Nixon, assassinations, Watergate. Were those factors as well, along with your parents? I mean, McGovern's run in 72 was certainly enlightening to some. We had Terry Curry on, and he talked about being clean for Gene. And those were the people in the late 60s, 1968, when Eugene McCarthy was running for president, who shaved their beards and mustaches so they could be clean for Gene.
Right.
Do you remember those times? And how much, obviously you do, you were just talking about it, but how much did it affect you, the tumultuous years between, say, 67 and 74?
Yeah, Robert, I think that's a good insight. I think they were hugely impactful. And given my parents' activity, in politics and the Democratic Party, I probably would have maybe had some interest anyway, but I was just fascinated by what was going on. I remember that summer sitting there watching every minute of the Watergate hearings with my mom, knowing who Sam Ervin was and Dash and Baker and the whole story coming out. And I remember very specifically, this is weird, but there was a article in the Indianapolis Star about the credibility gap and how Johnson was, lying. And now it seems like we all think they lie all the time, but especially my age and also the age of the country, you just didn't think your leaders were lying, and they were saying that Johnson was lying. I'm like, how can the president, lie and do bad things? I asked my dad, and he said, well, power does funny things to people, and it does funny things to people around them that they don't want to tell the emperor that he has no clothes, essentially. And I remember vowing to myself as like a 9-year-old, if I ever get a chance to be there, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to lie to who I work for. And that was weird, because then I had the chance later on to work closely with some political leaders. And I just remember that vow that I'm just going to tell them what I think. And you probably had this experience in the short run. You sometimes you're a shot messenger, because they're like, what? But then when they know you're going to tell them the truth or challenge them, then you become a trusted advisor, And so when I was chief of staff, I always told people when I worked for Evan Bayh, you got to tell him when you think he's wrong, and you guys are going to get jumped, and he's a smart guy, and he's going to cross-examine you, but ultimately he'll value your opinion more. And so those were very formative times for me, I guess.
Put the assassinations, those tragedies aside, but so much of what happened, just to focus on 1 second, on Watergate, was a very legal crisis, laws being broken, hearings, people being sentenced to jail, and significant sentences by maximum John Sirica, because he knew that there was a story that wasn't being told, and he served, I forget what he sentenced Howard Hunt to, like 35 years for this, third-rate burglary, as the president of the United States called it, I think. But so much about that crisis was rooted in the law. You had, whether it was Sam Ervin and John Dean and Nixon was an attorney. He was a law school grad, went to Duke. Did that stick in your mind, that the law, and ultimately the law was preserved, it won out over people, over power?
Yeah, I'm not sure I had those deep of insights, but maybe a little bit by osmosis. I mean, the heroes of that were lawyers, Ervin and Baker and all those guys. And then most of the ones that went to jail were lawyers, right? So it was sort of a mixed bag.
You mean like the Attorney General?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I thought John Dean, so many, he was a rat. To me, he was like this hero kind of person. But I think I was mostly influenced by my dad and him dropping out of law school, and him, his father had a 6th grade education, was active in the IBEW, was very proud of being an electrician. My father was an electrician. And this whole idea that it was this trade and it was this sort of sacred monopoly of access to justice sort of captivated my imagination. So I think a lot of it was almost like unfinished business with my dad. He dropped out. and I thought it'd be cool to make it through.
If you were Gerald Ford, would you have pardoned Richard Nixon?
If I was young Fred Glass in 1974, I would not have, because I'd want the pound of flesh and all that. But and I was mad at Ford for doing it, and I thought there was probably a deal and all that. But the 62-year-old Fred Glass thinks it was the absolute right thing to do. The long national nightmare needed to be over, and I thought, like a lot of leaders, right? I think Ford's contributions and strength is only becoming more clear as history moves on, at least for me. So I didn't like it at the time, but in retrospect, I think it was the right thing to do.
Donald Rumsfeld wrote a really good book on that, really good book on Ford, but he tackles that Ford knew that it was going to be a punch to his political gut, but it was the right thing to do. You matriculated to Indiana University in the 1970s, graduating in 1981. How fun was that?
It was awesome, man. So when I was a junior at Rebuff, my best friend and I, Brian Brawsey, went down to visit his older brother, Stu Brawsey, who was a freshman at McNutt, and which is a very fun dormitory to this day. And I had it was like a movie, that weekend at McNutt. And I'm like, this is where I'm going. I'm all in. And then I graduated in 77, went down there as a freshman. And that's just when Animal House came out. I remember I went to the Indiana Theater, watched Animal House, went next door to the Trojan Horse and had a gyro. And I'm like, this college thing is going to be right on, And so I had a great time at IU. We won a national championship in 81, which was great fun. And so it was a great experience.
Did you ever consider going someplace else?
I applied to go to Marquette and got in. But financially it wasn't going to work. So went to IU, never regretted that.
How close was Animal House, the movie, to the Fred Glass Bloomington Indiana University experience? And are you otter or are you Bluto, flounder?
All right. Well, those are very incriminating questions. I would say that I wasn't, of course, the crazy hyperbole, but I had a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun in school. I was probably closer to was Otter. Was he the Tim Matheson cucumber bean wormers? Why? Yeah, I wasn't that. I aspired to be that, but I was not that. I was not much of a ladies' man down there, but had a great time and got
you're kidding me, right? What do you got a full head of hair? You're 6'4". You're handsome. You're not a ladies' man down there.
No rap.
Oh, well, that's different. That's completely different.
No confidence, no rap.
You were also down there when they filmed Breaking Away. What was that experience like? Did you see them filming the movie? It's a brilliant movie. Doesn't get enough credit, quite frankly.
Yeah, it was awesome. I actually did. They asked a bunch of people to come into the 10th Street Stadium to be in the crowd for some of the bike scenes, and so I went over there for an afternoon and did that. But I think I ended up on the cutting room floor. I don't see myself in it anywhere.
Do you remember the movie being filmed? I mean, they weren't necessarily stars there. I mean, they weren't stars at the time, most likely,
right.
But was it a big deal on campus? I mean, Animal House had come out and movies being filmed on college campuses. I'm sure it was something there was a lot of buzz about.
Yeah, no, it was a big deal, and you'd see it going on around, it was a big deal. I love that movie. It's a great movie.
Is it weird to watch a movie and go, I was there? Like that captured exactly what it was like.
Oh yeah, no, it's really fun. Yeah, especially the Bloomington. I thought it caught the Bloomington vibe well with the quarries and the town and all that stuff. And then now it's such an era piece, right? Because you look back there and I got those short, all the stuff we wore, white socks up to our knees and short gym shorts and long hair. And we thought that was really cool. And now it looks, kind of dorky, but it's fun to watch.
My son and I watched Argo last night, not for the first time, but we watched it. And it's such a time capsule with the avocado phones and the cigarettes and the ashtrays everywhere and the small little TVs that, that you had to get up to actually change the channel.
Right.
It's amazing how movies can do that. Let me ask you the toughest question I think I'll ask you during the podcast.
All
Which
right.
movie is better, Breaking Away or Hoosiers?
That is a tough one. I got to go with Hoosiers. I mean, it's just such a fundamental, Indiana experience. My mom grew up in Tipton County, and that opening scene where they're just showing the winter road and the no leaves on the trees, and they just really captured, I think, kind of the essence of that. And so I love them both, but I'd probably have to go with Hoosiers.
Did you get to be pretty close to any of the players in 1981? IU won the national championship. We've had Ray Tolbert, Big Play Ray, on the Leaders and Legends podcast. He was really fun to talk to. Had an amazing career and was probably my favorite player on that team. I can remember this. I was born in 67. I can remember the 76 team. Obviously, you can remember 81 much better. Reagan is shot on March 30th, 81. IU supposed to play North Carolina. Is it going to be postponed? They eventually played it, and I think IU won by 12. Did you get to know Ray Tolbert, Landon Turner, Isaiah Thomas, Jim Thomas, Randy Whitman, Ted Kitchell, any of them?
In college, no. One of the benefits of being AD was I got to connect with them, and several of them were my classmates. Ray Tolbert and I were classmates. I actually have gotten to be pretty close to Landon Turner and know the other guys, but Landon and I formed a pretty strong friendship. My claim to fame, Robert, was, starting my freshman year at McNutt, we had this party on Little Five weekend. We called it the Ponderosa. We dressed up like Ponderosa characters, and it kind of grew. So by the time I was a senior, it was this huge party at this house I lived in at 505 East 8th Street. And I'm sitting there drinking some beer, and Randy Whitman walks up. And I was like, and he was like my favorite player, man, tough West Side guy,
Ben Davis, that's
player.
Right.
And he was at my party. So I was like, I've made it. I can not only graduate, I could die a happy person because, Randy Whitman's at my party. So that was my brush with greatness down there. And that was about as close as it got.
Did you get to know or hang out or be in class with Isaiah Thomas? I mean, people today don't understand, and deservedly so, right? Like, we get it, how gigantic of a star Isaiah Thomas was, especially his sophomore year at IU when he led them to the national championship.
Yeah, no, he was huge. I didn't get to know him. I had a couple classes with Ray Tolbert, so I had sort of a nodding acquaintance with him, but I was not cool enough to know any of the players. My closest thing was, Randy Whitman came to my party. He didn't know me, but he knew there was a lot of barbecue and beer, and that seemed sufficient to get him to come.
When you were athletic director at Indiana University, did you spend much time visiting your old haunts, driving past or walking past the house, the address that you just mentioned, or just walking through McNutt like, what the hell? Let me see what's going on in my old room, or anything like that? That sort of nostalgia hits you from time to time?
It did, and then when my own kids would be on campus and they would be going to some of the places I went to and all that, I sort of lived vicariously through them. Early on, Barb and I, because my wife and I met each other down there, Bloomington was a big part of our life and meeting at IU. We'd go to some of the places we used to go, and people would come up and like have shots with me and take pictures of me at like Kilroy's and stuff. I'm just like, this is not cool. I can't really do that anymore. So our go-to place was Bear's Place at 3rd and Jordan, which was awesome because all these music students and nobody really knew or cared anything about sports. And so after our games, kind of win or lose, we'd go there and have a few drinks, and, everybody would leave me alone because sports wasn't really their thing.
You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, a local veteran public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmond Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and McAllister Machinery, your friendly neighborhood Caterpillar dealer. Our guest today is Fred Glass, former president of the Capital Improvement Board, and we're going to get to that shortly. Former vice president at Indiana University and athletic director, and maybe best known as a good friend of Murray Clark.
For sure.
Do you have a particular leader or legend from Indiana whom you admire?
It'd really be Herman Wells. And some of your listeners will know who that is. Maybe some of the Purdue folks may not. But as you know, Robert, he was the president from like the mid 30s to the mid 60s, and really led IU from being sort of a backwater, regional kind of college to a truly internationally recognized, outstanding university. And I think he was a master politician, a great leader. And I've read about everything I can about him and really tried to emulate his leadership style when I became athletic director, because I think there were some real similarities in terms of where the university was when he started as president and where he wanted to take it, and where the athletic department was when I became AD and where I wanted to take it, and similar constraints in terms of resources and so forth. So Herman Wells is a real hero for me.
Way before you get to IU, and we'll talk about that a little bit more towards the end of the podcast, you started after law school, or as part of your education, becoming more involved in politics. In 1988, Evan Bayh, I don't think it was shocking that he won, but I would clearly call it an upset, becomes governor. Much like when Greg Ballard became mayor, which was shocking, quite frankly. It changed my life. How did Evan Bayh's election to governor in 1988 change your life, shape your life?
Well, it clearly did, and I'll always be grateful for that. I mean, just real briefly, when I was a junior at IU, I applied for and got an internship with Evan's dad, Birch Bayh, on the subcommittee on the Constitution in D.C., which really everything I've done since goes back to that in terms of having an opportunity to see it, government up close, and kind of takes the magic out of it. Like, because I always thought there was this magical thing that mere mortals couldn't figure out. And when you get a front row seat, you go, I could do that. And so it helped me substantively, understand government more, but also just helped me get connected with the Bayh people. And so when Evan came back to run for Secretary of State, I was connected in through the group I met when I was in my internship. And then I clerked for Judge Dillon, and being connected with Birch Bayh didn't hurt with that. And my wife and I shared it. She scheduled Susan for most of the Secretary of State and gubernatorial campaigns. So I had a little bit of a ramp up, but the big change was it went from being a hobby, to being what I did. And I jumped in and joined the senior staff and thought I'd do it a couple of years. I ended up doing it 5+, ended up being chief of staff. And just, as a young person, the governor was 32 when he got elected. So I was 29, which seems crazy now, but at the time seemed pretty normal. And I just had a disproportionate set of opportunities in a big, gigantic organization called state government, learning from a guy I had a lot of respect for and taught me a lot, about leadership. And then, of course, Bart was my deputy chief of staff, succeeded me as chief of staff. We became close friends. So when he was elected mayor, he wanted me to be involved in the administration and, had some great opportunities there. So on a number of levels, like your experience, it was really life-changing for me.
And we should offer our condolences at the loss of your friend, Susan Bayh, and to Governor Bayh, who we'd love to talk to when the time is right. He'd be a terrific podcast guest. But
absolutely,
she was a very kind lady. I only met her a couple times, and she couldn't have been nicer.
Good. Yeah, no. she was terrific. It was an awful thing, and really appreciate your kind words.
Well, I remember my mother crying when Marvella died about 40, 50 years ago, 45 years ago.
Yeah.
And we it didn't matter how we voted. We did not speak ill of Birch Bayh. I mean, he was, and we did a podcast about the career of Birch Bayh, Nancy Pappas, and had Louis Mahern and Bob Blameyer. And it was a terrific group of people. And, I just was old enough to have the frame of reference. I remember when he lost in 80, but I mean, of how important he was. I speak a lot on this podcast. I ask people about trees. There's coaching trees, whether it's Knight and Krzyzewski and everybody else, or Dean Smith and Roy Williams and all these permutations. But there are political trees, whether that's the Bayhs or Daniels or Kernan, certainly Peterson. The list goes on and on, right?
Lugar's tree. Yeah,
that's probably the redwood, I would have to think.
Exactly.
How much fun do you have? How much joy do you take in being a part of the extended Birch/Evan Bayh political family?
Yeah, that's a great observation, and I am very, very proud of it. I've been a great beneficiary of it. It makes me a great respecter of other trees. Like the Lugar tree is amazing, and all that spawned, and in a way, the Daniels tree is like a sapling from the Lugar tree, because he's really a Lugar guy, but now has his own tree because of all that he's done. And
Hudnut. I mean, I'm gonna say a name, and Chris Spangle, the podcast engineer, is nodding his head, and we can't see him. One of our great interviews that we did is with David Frick, deputy mayor for Bill Hudnut. David Frick is the most underrated, not underappreciated, but underrated figure in modern Indianapolis.
I totally endorse that. David has been a mentor for me. We were at Baker Daniels together. He was always very, very good to me. We had the odd situation with the Lucas Oil Stadium after the smoke cleared and the state ended up being in control of that. David chaired the state authority. I was chairing the Marion County Capital Improvement Board, and that was a breached berth and could have been a real problem, but because of David's stewardship and even demeanor and city first, community first mentality, that thing ended up being a really positive experience. And so I totally agree with you. Pretty much single-handedly got the Colts here, built the RCA Dome. Very humble. He wouldn't wear that on his sleeve, but Indianapolis is a much, much better place because of David Frick.
Absolutely. Humble is the humble genius and a deliverer. He's just got the golden touch.
Yeah, absolutely. And, our city, David may lead that parade in a way, but you think about those kind of civic leaders who bridged government, P.E. McAllister, Dave Frick, Ted Bohm, Bill Crawford, Jim Morris. I always felt like I was standing on their shoulders in a way, and felt the responsibility to try to be, somewhere close to as good as stewards as those folks were. And I think that's the secret sauce of Indianapolis, that these civic, that there's value and responsibility with these civic leaders who bridge gaps that just a lot of other communities just don't have. And so Dave is maybe one of the quintessential examples of that.
And there are so many other names we could mention. Bill Mays, and we would be here all day. Susan Brooks, the list goes on and on.
Absolutely.
Joe Slash. But it leads directly to my next question, which is the names that you just mentioned, and some of the names that I've mentioned, and some of the people who've come on the podcast. We've made this a point, a thread, for lack of a better term, that, and I remember P.E. McAllister saying this to me at lunch dozens of times. And he held your old job as president of the Capital Improvement Board. He said, politics never came up. Never one time would we have a political argument. everybody who was involved in the room, who was part of the solution, part of the decision, was like, how do we make this work for the city? So given your strong bipartisan reputation, how important has that been to Indianapolis's phenomenal growth over the last 50 years? And how important is it to you personally?
First of all, I think it's absolutely right. It's in some ways the key to everything. And one of the people that should be on that list that I neglected to mention is Pat Early, who's part of that group, the father of Victory Field, Bankers Life Fieldhouse. And I mentioned him in particular because he'd been the 8-year leader of the Capital Improvement Board before I was. And sort of in that tradition you were describing, when Bart was elected, there was sort of an acknowledgement by people that, well, he needs to have his leadership on the Capital Improvement Board, which I never thought it'd be me. Bart asked me to do it, whatever. I did it. But, we sat down with Pat, and he facilitated that. So my first meeting, I get elected president. I say, Pat, will you be my vice president? He goes, yeah. We worked through everything together. There were no secrets. It was completely transparent. It's exactly what you described. All the politics was left at the door, and we knew we'd have to pick that hat up on our way out to get stuff done. But when we were in there, it's like, what's good for the city? And it's just, again, I think it's really the secret to Indianapolis. First of all, the people that step in that breach, and they do it in a way it's not nonpartisan, it's bipartisan. People bring their strengths and spheres of influence to bear, but the decision-making is on a nonpartisan basis or bipartisan basis.
We should also mention a longtime president of the Capital Improvement Board, Jim Doro Sr.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Terrific leader in this city.
You got to be careful not to start this list because you mentioned a thread. It's like the string on the sweater. But, there's a dozen that just come rolling off your tongue, and we could get another couple dozen without even breaking a sweat because we've been blessed with awesome leadership in this community.
And it's quite frankly, Fred, to be candid with you, we're talking with Fred Glass on the Leaders and Legends podcast. One of the reasons I started this podcast, actually, you'll enjoy this story. I'll give you the cliff notes. That was suggested by Rachel Coverdale that I start a podcast as a way to promote my brand and promote my business and so on and so forth. Her husband is Tom Coverdale, former Indiana Mr. Basketball and point guard on IU's last Final Four run. And the only reason I said I would do it is so I could, quite frankly, talk to folks like you. And I've been very lucky because I grew up in Indianapolis. I was born 6 weeks after Richard Lugar, won mayor. I've lived here my whole life, except for the 3 years I was in the Army. And it's amazing to talk to people and ask this question. And I've asked it of almost everybody, and I'll ask it of you. If I had told you on the day you graduated high school, Fred, guess what? We're going to have a professional football team, and we're eventually going to host the Super Bowl and completely change what the Super Bowl means to the NFL and the country and Americans, you would have said?
Yay. I mean, I would have been shocked. I believed in Indianapolis. When I was in high school, and at that time, R.V. Welch, who was a, prominent city leader, ran for mayor against Bill Hudnut, lost. But he had the wherewithal to secure an NFL franchise. And a lot of people thought we would get a new team through R.V. Welch because he had made that. And so I was friends with his knucklehead nephew, Bobby Clifford. I don't know if you remember, Bob was city controller and so forth. And unfortunately died of the same awful brain cancer that took Susan by. But he got me hooked up to drive limousines of NFL owners who R.V. Welch was wining and dining in Indianapolis. So I had like a little Greek fisherman's cap and, a suit coat that was too big. And I'm driving these guys around. And I believed it was happened a whole different way and all that. And I never even thought about the Super Bowl. So I can't say I thought about that, but I didn't think it was crazy. I was hoping that would happen. And I could think of nothing cooler than that. I remember when they came into town and Dave Frick, Bill Hudnut, Bob Irsay, probably walked onto the field, the RCA Dome, Hoosier Dome then. The place was packed at like 2:00 on a Tuesday. And I'm like, Dan Fouts is going to be right down there. I'm going to be in here, and I'm going to be in the same building as Dan Fouts. That image just stuck in my head, and I was thrilled. So I felt like a special connection with the NFL and with the Colts. And even though I was a Packers fan, I moved over to the Colts side.
You've been a sports fan, obviously, your whole life. The Capital Improvement Board is a unique organization within local government, and it does all sorts of things, including own most of the stadiums and venues and places, the convention center. But those things don't get done, as you mentioned just a few minutes ago, without people shedding their labels and working together. Do you have, and how important, let me ask this question two different ways. Who are some of your best Republican friends? I know one of them is Murray Clark, who is a very unsung leader, a terrific person. His family has done tons for this city and state. And he's my former boss when he was chairman of the Indiana Republican Party. But talk about some of your friends on the other side of the aisle and just how important it is to you personally, as it is to me, to have friendships, good friendships with people whom you may not vote alike.
Yeah, Robert, I think it's critically important and very enriching to have those friendships. Despair may be too strong, but not too far off about what the toxicity of current political discourse is doing to those kind of relationships. But yeah, Murray's one of my closest friends, former law partners. We used to do a frickin' frack thing.
Capital Caucus.
In law school, my best friend was Brian Bosma, and we've stayed, close over the years. And Susan Brooks and I were interns together at the old Bytabert Capehart law firm and close friends. And I was friends with her husband, David, before that. And there's probably not a more partisan, occasionally caustic person in town than David.
We call him a fighter.
He's a fighter. He's a good guy to have on your team. That's like, so I've been the beneficiary of those friendships and treasured those friendships. And Democrat and Republican, I used to say they were battlefield friendships. When we're on a campaign or in an office and you're in the foxhole sometimes with the incoming, you're forging, lifelong friendships. And I was the beneficiary of working with some great people in the governor's office and then working with some really great people across the aisle. And I got to say, Robert, not to blow smoke up your skirt, as my father used to say, but we're different ages, but I've always felt you're totally cut out of that cloth too, right? I mean, you're a partisan, as I'm a partisan communications director for the state party or deputy chief of staff for Greg Ballard, probably his primary spokesperson, all that. But someone I always felt like we could reach across the aisle, we could talk about things and get things done. I should add on my list Bill Steffen. He was
exactly
Goldsmith's chief of staff when I was Bart's transition director. We were law school classmates and sort of reconnected during that challenging transition. And I think went more smoothly because he and I trusted each other as friends. And then because karma is a real thing, he chairs the search committee on the IUAD gig and helps me get that job, and it's just a cool environment where, Bill's a fairly high profile Republican and I'm a fairly high profile Democrat, but we've come together in a variety of ways that I think have been, good outcomes.
Well, thank you for your kind words. I chuckle that it's the benefit of an East Side education in the sense that, the East Side was pretty union and then it became kind of Reagan Democratish in the 80s. But, my father was basically right of Charlemagne and my mother was left of Khrushchev. And, maybe it's no surprised that they got married and divorced from each other twice. I guess they just couldn't figure it out. And you get exposed. One of the best experiences of my entire life was being someone, I'm going to say his name, was being a student of Bill Bloomquist, a professor at IUPUI, who's incredibly brilliant and amazingly generous with his intellect. And, he's he's certainly more D than R, certainly. But he's a thinker, and he's a prober, and he's a like, okay, you think you've got this argument down? Well, let's go to it. And then you realize 5 minutes later you don't have a clue what you're talking about. And that's just so beneficial. And I remember when I started working for Mayor Ballard in November of 2008. I didn't start when I was at Shield Sexton with all your friends over there, Mikey Diltz and Brian Sullivan and others. And telling him that the difference between you, Greg Ballard, and Bart Peterson is negligible in many ways, that the Venn diagram is so incredibly fat in the middle, and that Bart Peterson was a terrific mayor who had, a rough political stretch the last 6 months of his second term, and that we're going to benefit a lot from what he did, and that people don't dislike Bart Peterson. Hell, he won in 2003 by 30 points over a really good guy named Greg Jordan. And that we're not, it's crazy to throw everything out. Let's do what we want to do, but let's build on what he did as he built on Goldsmith, and the list goes on and on. And I think that helps build the bipartisanship when you know that the other side has good ideas and has good people. Absolutely.
And that's easier to pull off in a city, and shame on us if we don't take advantage of that at the municipal level.
We also want to I'm trying to put together a podcast on the career of Julia Carson, speaking of someone who left an impact, and we'll get it done. It's just a matter of time.
Those will be great stories. Be sure to have Bart on there. He's got great Julia stories.
Well, it would almost turn into a panel if everybody who had a story about the Congresswoman actually came on. In the last few minutes we have here, let's talk about IU. You decided to accept the gig, apply for the gig, and get it, to be athletic director. I've never experienced anything like that professionally. I'm only 53. Maybe I will one day. But to be a boss, a vice president at an institution where you had spent so much time as quote unquote a kid, what was it like strolling around campus, Vice President Fred Glass, as opposed to freshman Fred Glass?
Well, that would certainly be night and day in a variety of reasons, but it's interesting to describe it that way because my whole career up till then, I'd always been a staff guy, and I really liked being a staff guy, and I thought I was a really good staff guy. I was Evan's staff guy, I was Bart's staff guy, and as a lawyer, you're really a staff guy. It's not your company. It's not your administration. You're advising someone else, and I liked that. And I never aspired to be an office holder. Well, I did when I was a kid, but not when I was older. So the allure of the IU job was to like be in charge of something. And even if it was making widgets, I was 49. It was a good time for me. I thought to do something else. And then the thing you were doing wasn't widgets. It was Bloomington, college, sports, kids. So I thought this was going to be awesome, and it really was awesome. But it was part of the allure was to be an executive and not be a staff guy. And then, like you were saying, going back down to Bloomington, it was awesome. We got a condo down there, spent a lot of time down there. I did get some good advice when I was pursuing the job. I called Jack Swarbrick, who could be on that list that we were talking about earlier, and he had been a partner of mine at Baker Daniels. Of course, a few months before I became the AD at IU, he became the AD at Notre Dame. And I said, "Hey man, is this a gig I want to do?" And he goes, "Definitely." And I said, "Do you have any advice?" He goes, "Tell him you want to be a vice president, because that helps get things done." Which, hell, I didn't know. And the only reason I asked to be a vice president is because Jack told me. And so I asked to be a vice president. They said, okay. And that was really great advice, because in a college environment, titles matter. And being a vice president really helped me cut through a lot of stuff that I think otherwise would have been more challenging.
We would love to have Mr. Swarbrick on the Leaders and Legends podcast. I may send you a note to see if you can be helpful. Maybe you and Mark Miles can persuade him, but he's done an amazing job at Notre Dame.
Yeah.
And it leads right to my next question. And Swarbrick's done an amazing job, I think, at about everything that he's ever done.
Yeah.
But, you're in a law firm and you're prominent here in Indianapolis, and you're involved in a lot of big decisions, and you're being interviewed by local media about these decisions and the things you need to do. You've got powerful, influential friends and relationships. And then 6 months later, you're on ESPN 15, 20 times a year. How much different is that? Is the scrutiny, is the limelight? I remember watching IU games, and there you were, watching the game or taking notes or talking to someone. Now it seems like it's just so much more magnified. And how did you handle that? And did you enjoy it?
I really wasn't that high. I didn't consider myself to be very high profile in the city sort of before. I mean, with the Super Bowl thing, maybe by necessity. But it was a different level at IU. Just the scrutiny and the, not only like ESPN, but there's probably like 12 people that make a living by blogging about IU sports and all the message boards and people would say something to my wife about what scarf she was wearing in the game. And, it's just, Archie Miller used to say, yeah, they text about what kind of slushy I got at, Speedway and stuff. The intent, the scrutiny is fairly intense and sort of unavoidable. Not the part of the job I liked that much, but you're a communications guy, and I didn't know shit about what I was supposed to be doing as a non-traditional candidate. Suddenly plopped into the IU role, and I really relied back on my experience in public service, because I think properly viewed, being the AD at a major public research university is like public service. So I turned to things like transparency and big, gigantic goals, and articulate your priorities until everybody wants to throw up that what you're about. And those, I think, stood me in good stead, that experience in public service. And part of that was, communicating a consistent message. And my experience working for Bart and working for Evan, I think, helped me in that regard.
You made some comments a few months ago, the early part of 2021, I believe, or maybe in December of 2020. IU inexplicably was wronged with regard to the Big Ten and the bowl season. Tell us why you spoke out and you said basically, and I'm paraphrasing, so please correct me, that the powers that be do not want IU football, to be powerful, to be successful, because of the schools around us, especially in the Big Ten, who come and poach our best players. And I'm not gonna say it was a shocking thing to read. I smiled big because I knew it came from a really good place for you. Why was it important to you to say that?
Well, the part of the context was we had just come off this thing where they had a rule that you had to play 6 games to be in the championship game. And they changed that so that Ohio State could represent the Eastern Division instead of IU, which I believe was 100% the right decision. It was a pandemic rule. It wasn't like an 80-year rule. And Ohio State beat us on the field. And so they should have done that. But IU took a high road and didn't complain about that and accepted that, as I thought they should have. But I sort of thought the conference kind of owed us one a little bit. And then the College Football Playoff Committee doesn't put us in the New Year's Six. And then to add insult to injury, we get passed over for the Citrus Bowl by Northwestern, and all this stuff's very hierarchical. And so it was really out of whack to have Northwestern jump over us. And it was the first year in the college football playoff era where 2 Big Ten teams hadn't made the playoffs. And I submit that if the second place team had wings on their helmets, or even Hawkeyes on their helmets, or nothing on their helmets like Penn State, they would have made it. But because there was an interlocking IU on the helmet, good old IU sort of, gets left out. In part, I think, because the powers that be, the power structure, the good old boy network had a vested interest in IU not being good at football. They liked it when we were an automatic W. They liked it when they could come in here and take our best players. They liked it when we weren't a player in national recruiting and so forth. And my successor couldn't say that, shouldn't say that. Tom Allen couldn't say that, shouldn't say that. But I was sort of uniquely positioned where I wasn't connected with IU, but I had a certain amount of credibility. And so I thought I needed to speak out, not to vet my spleen. It wasn't in a fit of pique, but it was, I thought, strategic. Like, this needs to be called out, because I didn't want the conference and the college football playoff group and the ADs to say, well, we can kind of screw Indiana, and they're just not going to say anything about it. So I thought it was important to say. I think through unusual circumstances, I was in a position to do it. I felt like it was kind of my responsibility to say it.
Any regrets?
No.
One other thing that you worked hard on, as I recall, was to try to reconcile Coach Bobby Knight with the university. He has said some very tough things about the former leadership and the university, and quote, those people, close quote. Why was that so important to you? And what did you think when you saw Coach stroll across the court at Assembly Hall during last year's game against Purdue?
Yeah, so my biggest goal was to try to remove impediments that would keep him from coming back. I never want to put pressure on him or be perceived as putting pressure on him, because I thought that would be counterproductive. But we put him in the Hall of Fame. We did a variety of things, I think, to kind of lower the temperature and hopefully create an environment where he felt comfortable coming back, recognizing all of his contributions to Indiana basketball, which are undeniable. Not really focusing on the other things, because as an athletic director, those weren't really my focus. My focus was what he had done for basketball. And Robert, we had paid a huge price as Indiana basketball to be disconnected from our patriarch. We like to think of ourselves as a historic blue blood program. All the other historic blue blood programs had their guy. Dean Dome at North Carolina, Krzyzewski's still at Duke, Rupp Arena, the Wizard of Westwood, even Izzo and Judd Heathcote at Michigan State. And we were denied that. And I think it was really more debilitating to IU basketball than people even recognized, to have our former players unsure of whether they could come back without alienating a coach. And so I thought it was really important to try to get IU basketball where I wanted it to be, to try to have that rift healed. But I also knew it would probably only come from the former players. So again, we talked about Randy Whitman. I won't go into all the details, but Randy Whitman and Quinn Buckner really drove that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I got so caught up in the details of it that I sort of lost the cosmic part of it. And you asked about how I felt when we walked across the court. Then it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was sitting next to Mark Cuban, my classmate, and he said, "You did it, man." And first I was like, well, don't jinx it, because he's not done yet. And then he started acting crazy. He goes, I see what you mean. But the reaction of the crowd and the reaction of the players, I'm getting goosebumps right now thinking about it, because it was in a moment, everything changed. And that happens very rarely in the world. It happens very rarely in sports. But in a moment, everything changed. Family was back together again. And I was so glad for Coach Knight that he could enjoy those accolades. And then I was so happy for Hoosier Nation. And I'm really happy for IU basketball, because I think it helped set the table for us getting to where we want to be.
It's hard to explain to people who weren't alive in the 70s, 80s, early 90s that Bob Knight was the state, unless you lived in West Lafayette, perhaps. But his 3 national championships, 11 Big Ten championships, including his most underrated achievement, he won 36 games in a row in the Big Ten. 75, 76, Olympic gold medal, all the things that happened. To have that alienation, you made a great point. It brought the family back together and made IU able to embrace the Blue Bloods, like the Blue Bloods did, excuse me. But on the other side of Coach Knight, from our friend Quinn Buckner, was Mike Woodson. And he ended up kind of moving into Assembly Hall after the end of the year. Give us, just very quickly before we move on, your thoughts on Coach Mike Woodson.
Yeah, I'm all in with Coach Woodson. We exchanged texts after he was named. My history with him goes back to Broad Ripple. I in addition to Rebuff, I should have noted that I also attended Broad Ripple High School. I went there for driver's ed in the summer, and you had to take another class. So I took driver's ed and library experience. And I used to go to the games at that little Cracker Box gym and watch Mike Woodson play, because we're roughly contemporaries. So when I was in high school, I'd go to games there all the time and got to know Coach Woodson while I was athletic director. And so, have great confidence in Scott Dolson and his judgment, and what he's done so far. I think it's very encouraging. So I'm all in and looking forward to supporting him and the program going forward.
You going to wear your candy stripes?
Who, me?
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Yeah. As you know, Robert, I am very much unafraid to make myself look like a goof. So I'll be looking like I was looking like a goof as AD. I'll look like a goof as a regular fan.
We have reached the point in the Leaders and Legends podcast where we ask our guests the same 5 questions. Fred Glass, are you ready?
I hope so.
And you won't be a goof, I promise. What was your first job?
You can't fix that. First job, Indianapolis Star Paperboy.
Number 2, what was your first concert?
Okay, this is the part where I'm probably going to breach the no goof rule. So my best friend Jimmy Galloway and I called in to WIFE. We were the 13th caller, and I won tickets to see Sha Na Na at the convention center. So when I was about 8th grade, I saw Sha Na Na at the convention center, and that was a good show too, by the way.
Bowser
was my guy. Yeah.
I only say this. I've said this a few times in other podcasts. I only say it because of the IU connection. Greg Ballard graduated from IU in 1978, and his first concert was Sly and the Family Stone in Bloomington.
That's strong. That's a good one.
Number 3, if you could suggest any book for someone to read, which book would you recommend?
All right. First of all, I'm going to shamelessly plug my upcoming book. I have a book coming out in November by IU Press called Making Your Own Luck: From a Skid Row Bar to Rebuilding IU Athletics. My dad owned a Skid Row bar. But since that's not available yet, I won't say that, but I'm going to use that as a way to sneak that in. I was talking about the impact of the Jesuits on me. There's a book by Father Jim Martin, who's a well-known Jesuit commentator. It's called The Jesuit Guide to Almost Everything. And I know that sounds like a little bit of a silly title, but I think it's a very impactful book about the history of the Jesuits and the way of proceeding, detachment, decision-making. And whether you're a religious person or not, that is a great book to read. The Jesuit Guide to Almost Everything.
Number 4, if you could witness any event in history, be there in person as it happens, which event would you choose?
How about Woodstock? Does that count?
But Jimi Hendrix makes it count.
Hey, man, can you imagine being there? Like, first of all, it's a long event. It's not like one thing. It's like 3 days. And then all that music. I'm gonna go with Woodstock.
That's unique. We've not had that one before. Good for you. Number 5, last question. If you could have dinner with anyone living today, 2 hours completely off the record, just to chat, whom would you choose?
I think I do Pope Francis, Jesuit, fascinating life. Get to meet the Pope. I'll go with Pope Francis.
Terrific answers. You have been listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, a local veteran public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmond Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and McAllister Machinery, your friendly neighborhood Caterpillar dealer. Our guest today has been former Indiana University Vice President and Athletic Director, former Chief of Staff to Governor Evan Bayh, and former President of the Capital Improvement Board and proud member of the Brebeuf Mafia, Mr. Fred Glass. Fred, thank you for your time.
Robert, thanks so much for having me on. I'm really flattered and really enjoyed it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much for listening to Leaders and Legends, brought to you by Veteran Strategies Incorporated. If you want to contact us about this program or our menu of public relations services, please send us an email at robert@veteranstrategies.com. That's robert@veteranstrategies.com.